Mammography is one of the best screening tools to find breast cancer. Breast cancer may not be preventable, but you can survive it through early detection. If you're a mother or grandmother, sister or best friend,
aunt or cousin,
we encourage you to know your risk, make healthy lifestyle choices, and to know what's normal for your body.
Get screened, get your mammogram annually.
We did!
Good evening, Bahamas. You're tuned into NB12 Weekend, broadcasting from Cable 12 Studios on Robinson Road. Coming up tonight in news, our news team catches video of pools of oil in the sea near BEC's Clifton plant. The central bank prepares for the establishment of a national credit bureau. So how's that going to affect you? The immigration minister responding to anti-Bahamian sentiment in recent news stories, plus why a man was recently wearing heels and a skirt in the downtown area. I'm Paige McCartney. We've got those stories and more straight ahead on NB12 Weekend. It appears that countless gallons of oil are flowing into the sea from BEC's Clifton Power Plant, with the government recently announcing that it was seeking the assistance of foreigners to determine the exact origin of oil leaks. Our news team found one possible source, and no one seems to be doing anything to stop it. Kyle Joaquin reports.
This should not have oil in it. This is going to the sea. This is BC's cooling water that's going to the sea. That is oil. You're looking at it.
And that's just the tip of the iceberg for the oil that is flowing out to the sea from the Bahamas Electricity Corporation's Clifton Power Plant. Former State Minister for the Environment, Phenton Neymour, says there is no need for specialists to be brought in to determine where oil leaking into the sea is coming from when it's obvious it's coming from BEC. Nearly 2 weeks ago, Environment Minister Kenred Dorset said investigations were ongoing to determine what caused an oil spill near Adelaide Beach. But when our news team arrived at Clifton this weekend to see the amount of oil flowing through trenches that lead into the sea might shock you. Oil could be seen draining down some of the holding tanks onto the ground and into the trenches. According to Neymour, when he took over at BEC in 2007, he met the same problem.
We immediately gave directives that these practices were to stop. BEC was directed by myself to cease using the cooling wells that were pumping contaminated water that was being released to the sea. BEC was constantly monitored in this regard.
Now, according to Neymour, this trench that we're standing above should only have water in it. Unfortunately, it's filled with oil running straight into the sea.
This trench serves as a retaining trench, that if there's a spill, there's containment of that area. It should not have oil in it. It should be clean at all times. And obviously there's a leak. Because the walls are not, there's so much oil being spilt, it has now come out of the retainment area. And it is now going directly into the ground also. There's no protection to the groundwater here. Inside here, also. It's going directly into the caves and into the ground, into our groundwater and out to the sea.
Neymour says all this oil wastage is being felt by the consumers.
This is oil that the Bahamian people are paying on their fuel surcharge every month that they're pouring into the ground, millions of gallons. This is clearly a dereliction of duty of both the Minister of the Environment and the Executive Chairman at BEC. They, in my opinion, should be asked to resign for allowing this to continue.
Over the past few months, blackouts have been the norm in New Providence. The former state minister also believes the overfilling of these waste oil tanks is directly related to the amount of load shedding happening throughout the capital.
BEC is wasting hundreds of thousands of gallons of waste oil at a rate that tanks cannot even hold it. The waste oil is directly being spilt onto the ground and exceeds 3 feet in depth. The oil is left to drain into trenches that lead directly to the sea. BEC is forced to use the contaminated cooling well and damaged generators because of their inability to generate enough electricity. Every day, BEC has been load shedding, and it has not ceased.
Neymour says both the minister responsible for the environment and the BEC chairman should be forced to resign over the issue. Well, we contacted BEC Executive Chairman Leslie Miller, who claims not all the oil is coming from BEC. He said all the other companies around should be questioned as well. He said the experts flown in by the government will be back to do a total cleanup of Clifton. Reporting for NB12, I'm Kyle Joaquin.
Well, legislation for the establishment of a credit bureau in the Bahamas could make it even more difficult for Bahamians to obtain financing for things like homes and vehicles. But according to the governor of the central bank, a credit bureau will further stabilize and grow the economy. With bank arrears averaging 23%, meaning about 1 in every 5 loans defaulting, Wendy Craig told NB12 a national credit reporting system will reduce the risk commercial banks are faced with in issuing loans, while also preventing Bahamian consumers from biting off more than they can chew.
When they have difficulty meeting payments, you have to look at the other side of it as well. This is only one individual, but you can have many individuals in the same situation. And so an institution therefore faces a lot of risk, and they have to start provisioning, writing off the loans, and so that eats into their capital that should be available for additional or further lending.
The central bank has been working toward implementing a credit rating system in the Bahamas since 2010. Once implemented, your credit report will not contain any historical data or information on loans you have before the legislation becomes enacted, unless there's a judgment out against you in that regard. The credit report is expected to help borrowers with good payment history access lower collateral requirements and interest rates, and encourage those with less than admirable histories to improve their credit rates. The central bank is also inviting other agencies like utility companies and businesses that provide financing to sign on to the Bureau so that payment histories for those companies can also be monitored and included in credit reports. Craig said by implementing this legislation, it will also make it easier for lenders to offer risk-based pricing to customers, streamline the credit decision-making process, and lower exposure to risky loans, which could lower operational costs, improve capital, and eventually services and offerings to consumers.
Go into a bank, you're filling out a loan form, and the loan officer asks you to declare how many loans you have out there. Most persons, it happens that persons will say they know that they're not going to be able to get the loan, so they would say, okay, I just have a loan at bank XYZ. And it's only when they run into difficulties that the lending institution determines that they have loans not only at bank XYZ, but at maybe several other banks, maybe also at a retail store. And so it complicates the situation. So the bank ends up lending more money to an individual that they could afford to repay.
The bank hopes to have government present legislation for the establishment of the Bureau by early next year, and that it will cost about $2 million to implement. A request for solution will be issued by the end of this month for private companies to bid on providing a credit rating service.
New facilities that would come into effect after the legislation is enacted. You would have information on those facilities captured in the credit report.
Central Bank Legal Counsel Rochelle Delaveau said to ensure the Bureau is viable, a hub-and-spoke model will have to be used, in which a private company that produces credit ratings for other jurisdictions includes the Bahamas.
Which means that you'd have an existing credit bureau operator that's operating in another jurisdiction, right? And they would have an office in the Bahamas, and so they would have the critical mass. They'd have the Bahamian populace as well as the populace of the jurisdiction where they're operating. So they could be operating in Jamaica, for example, but they would have an office here to interface with the local population.
Most recently, Guyana launched its first credit bureau with Iceland-based company Credit Info International spearheading the project. While the proposed credit reporting legislation provides for the collection of sensitive consumer information, Craig said a major component of the bill will be privacy and ensuring the proper use of that information. The plan is to also establish a tribunal to give consumers opportunities to challenge their credit report and provide confidence in a fair and transparent system. And shifting gears now, inflammatory comments made by a shantytown resident during a television report have sparked outrage among many on social media, prompting Minister of Foreign Affairs and Immigration Fred Mitchell to call on calm heads to prevail. The inflammatory remarks were made during ZNS News Friday night when a man said that there were more Haitian Bahamians than Bahamians and that Bahamians shouldn't start something they can't finish. Mitchell said that police have made contact with the man in the news report who made the comments and they're investigating the intent behind those comments. However, he was not able to say if the man can and would face charges. He said it's important for all patriotic and law-abiding Bahamians to take a deep breath and let the authorities deal with the matter. Mitchell added that he doesn't believe that one person's comments reflect the sentiments of the entire Haitian Bahamian community.
You have to be careful how you take what one individual says. I mean, I think that it is important for us to, just take a deep breath and not get too carried away by what one individual says. The fact is that this is not a policy, either the removal of the shanty towns or the question of whether you have permission to live and work in the Bahamas is not a question which is aimed at any specific national group. And we should refrain from pointing it in that direction because it is not. The matter is a generic policy which applies to all non-nationals who are in the country.
The minister said over the next week in particular, those with a public platform must be reasoned in their response.
One of the things that I think is important is the radio talk show hosts over the coming weeks. They should be how they respond to this and not try and whip this up into something that it isn't. We have to be judicious and wise. We have a society and we don't want creating divisions where there should not be any. So that's my appeal. I can't tell the press or the radio talk show hosts what to do and what not to do. But this is a time for us to just operate in a reasoned and sensible fashion, and that's the best advice I can give.
The Ministry of Environment and Housing has undertaken a shantytown removal project after a study conducted last year found that there are more than a dozen thriving illegal communities on New Providence alone. Minister responsible Kenrick Dorsett said to date at least 6 shantytowns have been removed, 4 smaller sites and 2 larger main sites.
With respect to Joe Farrington Road, I think many of you were there last year at the same time when we began this exercise of removing some of the buildings. At that time, the occupants were working together with us and systematically actually removing themselves from the site.
And in other news, police are getting set to charge an American man who was on a cruise ship with drug possession. Reports are that the 33-year-old from Jacksonville, Florida, was on board his cruise ship docked at Prince George Wharf at around 4:30 yesterday afternoon when he was approached by tourism policing unit officers who were acting on intelligence. Police say they discovered an unspecified quantity of marijuana on the suspect, and he's expected to be charged as early as tomorrow. And while he admits that more can be done when it comes to gun control, State Minister for National Security Keith Bell says under the Christie administration there has been a decrease in crime.
When you talk about crime has gone down, crime has gone up, it's really the activity. When you talk about you have an increase in gun seizures, an increase in weapon seizure, an increase in drug seizure, it tells you that the activity in the area is great. Not necessarily that crime has gone down. The good thing for us is our detection rate has increased. And so when you look at the overall crime statistics, you would see greater results, greater detection rate, and you'd have seen, as a result of the greater detection rate, you'd have seen some degree of reduction.
In the months leading up to the 2012 general elections, the then opposition Progressive Liberal Party placed billboards around some areas of New Providence highlighting 400-plus murders under the Free National Movement. Party leaders have since admitted that should not have happened and that crime is a social ill. According to recent crime statistics, serious crime across New Providence, including murder, has decreased. However, on a national scale, murder is up. Bell says crime should never be made political. It should always be high up on government's agenda next to do job creation.
Any government, I think they have to address crime. It has to be up there along with the economy and the state of jobs, trying to create a job creation. And so, I mean, wanting to do something and actually doing something is what makes us different from the rest of the which makes us different from the FNM. I believe that the PLP has the answer. I believe that our programs are working, but the activity in our country is pretty high, and we have to ensure that we seek to reduce it as much as we possibly can.
And as the FNM gears up for its big one-day convention next month to finally settle the leadership issue in the party, Free National Movement Chairman Darren Cash says he has no concern about whether the party's November 21st convention is in violation of the FNM's constitution as it relates to whether adequate notice was given. An FNM delegate claimed that the date set is in breach of the Constitution. The Constitution says you have to give at least 56 days notice, but FNM leader Dr. Hubert Minnis said Cash only gave 42 days notice. Cash said that doesn't matter as the Central Council, which is the highest authority outside convention, and since the Central Council approved it, there's nothing to worry about. He said the convention will go on as planned. Stay with us. When NB12 returns, more from the Minister of Immigration, plus suggestions on how to improve the justice system from a top-ranking U.S. attorney. Stay with us.